Hello and welcome to Veterans of the Valley. I'm Tom Turbyville. Richard Richardson of Bryan tells an impressive story of his short time in Europe during World War II, near the end of that campaign in 1945. And we will talk about that today, and his training in AAA, anti-aircraft artillery. He was stationed at Camp Wallace in Galveston County when Pearl Harbor was attacked. He was even shipped out to California in case the Japanese attacked the mainland. He arrived in Europe too late to experience combat, but he served his country proudly. But what also impresses me about this man is that at the age of 95, when the weather's good, he'll go play golf twice a week, and he regularly shoots much better than his age. Please welcome former Army Tech Sergeant Richard Richardson to Veterans of the Valley. Mr. Richardson, it's a pleasure to know you, and it's a pleasure to tell your story. You were raised in Minnesota. Right. And you joined the you joined up very early at about the age of 15. Talk about your time in Minnesota. Talking about that.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for having me here. I appreciate it very much.
It's a pleasure.
I appreciate it very much. Yeah, I joined the Minnesota National Guard when I was a freshman in high school at age 15.
15.
And our first sergeant didn't want me in the company. He says, "You won't last." He says, "You won't make it." He says, "You're just a kid." Well, I was in the Army in the office, and I'd signed the papers, enlistment papers, and when he walked in, he says, "Who's this?" And the boy and the other member who brought me in there, he said, "Well, he's our new recruit."
Yes, sir.
He said, "Get him out of here. He's just a damn kid. We don't want him." About that time, the executive officer walked in, and they were short of personnel, and they had to get their enlistment up, or they'd miss their summer camp. And back during the Depression, if you missed that summer camp, you missed a lot of dollars, because
right.
The average GI made $30 in 2 weeks, and that's a lot more money than they made sometimes all summer long.
Exactly.
And so the first sergeant, the executive officer said, "Get him signed up," and he turned to the friend that brought me in there. He said, "Now take him downstairs to the supply sergeant and get him a uniform, get him a rifle, and get him up on the floor ready to drill at 8 o'clock. So I become a boy soldier at age 15.
I'll be darned. 15, that's amazing.
Yeah.
You left Minnesota after high school and you went to Chicago because the jobs were more plentiful there.
That's the only place I could find a job.
You could find a job.
Yeah.
But you were drafted in March of 1941.
March 15th.
March 15th, 1941.
Right.
And you took your first trip to Texas, to Camp Wallace, Texas, which at the time was actually an anti-aircraft training facility at the time.
Yeah,
right?
It was a sort of a boot camp for anti-aircraft artillery training.
Yes, sir.
The American Army up to that time never had any anti-aircraft troops trained and designed and equipped to fight aircraft. They
Right.
just didn't have them.
Yes, sir.
They didn't think anybody would ever invade this country with aircraft. They didn't need them, you know what I mean?
Right.
That was their thinking. What do we need with anti-aircraft troops? Nobody's going to fly over here from Europe, you know,
Right.
or Japan,
Right.
you know, not thinking that when the Army moved to Europe, that's when they needed the anti-aircraft troops.
Right, right.
And the Germans had an air force.
You were drafted into the regular Army, and it was where you were at Camp Wallace, December 7th, 1941. What do you remember about that Sunday and hearing about the attack on Pearl Harbor?
Well, I was on the end for, I think, a year.
Right.
But that was on a Sunday. Monday morning, they put a notice on the bulletin board that all one-year draftees were in for the duration.
Yes, sir.
Forget about going home.
Right, because you were 10 months into your one-year hitch.
Yeah, I only had 2 months left.
When Pearl Harbor was attacked, so
Right, yeah.
everything changed then, right?
Yeah, everything changed.
Everything changed.
They relegated me to a training cadre at Camp Wallace, training new recruits coming in. I got promoted to a sergeant, and I spent, I think, about 15 months there training new recruits coming in.
Right.
Which was got to be sort of a monotonous job.
Because your plan,
so
had America not entered the war with Pearl Harbor, your plan was to get out, go to California, get a job where they were manufacturing planes going to Europe, right?
Yeah, right. They said they needed people out there to manufacture planes. They
Right.
couldn't build them fast enough for the English and the French. They wanted all the planes they could get a hold of.
Right. Talk about the time before you went overseas, though, and what you did. You did some training, I believe, in North Carolina. Is that right?
Yeah, I was trained.
Camp Davis?
I was stationed at the camp in North Carolina, up north of Wilmington.
Right, Camp Davis?
Camp Davis,
Yes,
right.
sir. Mm-hmm.
I spent 2 years there.
Right.
I spent 2 years there training, teaching anti-aircraft tactics
Right.
to officers coming in from the civilian life.
Right. 50 caliber machine gun training.
50 caliber machine guns. We had the 40 millimeter, we had the 37 millimeter.
But your specialty was 40 millimeter.
My specialty was 40 millimeter, right.
Right. We're going to have a picture later on of a sample of a 40 millimeter gun that was your specialty. They sent you to school for that. The 40 millimeter, talk about that. It was obviously the best weapon for low-flying aircraft because the Japanese didn't have any bombers and the Germans didn't have many, so that was the importance of that weapon, right?
Yeah, most of the aircraft that come up against us were low-flying aircraft.
Yes, sir.
And that 40 millimeter was an automatic weapon, and it was a good weapon. It was clip-fed, 7 shots, 7 rounds at a time.
Right.
You could get off a lot of, you could use a lot of ammunition in a hurry.
Right. Talk about being sent to California, because at the time after Pearl Harbor, we didn't know whether the Japanese was going to attack the mainland or not.
You know, back then the Army it hadn't faced situations like this, and they would jump at conclusions. You know,
Yes, sir.
We better get some troops out here and get them out here fast because the Japs could bypass Pearl Harbor and come right on in. So they had us load up 40 millimeters on flat cars, and we had to sleep on those flat cars with those guns all the way out to California at night.
Right.
Like it was wintertime, like the frost to death.
Yes.
So, and we took them out there, and we set them up on high-rise buildings that could support them. That was a lot of work.
Yes, sir.
But we no more got them up there and of course, we lived in the hotels, which was fine, but a week or 10 days, they said, well, we don't think we need those guns up there, so we take them back down and took them back to Camp Wallace.
Right. Never saw a Japanese plane, fortunately.
Never saw a Japanese plane, no. Japanese plane never got beyond Pearl Harbor.
So you came back to Camp Wallace, and then in 1945, this was after you had gone to Camp Davis to do a couple of years of training others that we already talked about. You were transferred to the 303rd Ordinance Company. Talk a little bit about that and what the Ordinance Company exactly was and what its duty was. It pretty much had to do with weapons and ammunition and combat vehicles and things like that, right?
Yeah, let's see, let me think. I was at camp down by Brownwood. I can't think of the name of the camp. Camp Bowie, I think it was.
Okay.
And I was sort of in limbo. I mean, they didn't know what to do with me.
Right.
I was an anti-aircraft artillery specialist, but this outfit was getting ready to move overseas, so they pulled me out one day and gave me traveling orders and shipped me up to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri.
Yes, sir.
Where I joined the 303rd Ordinance Company.
Yes, sir.
And they were getting ready to go overseas. But before they went overseas, they shipped us down to Brownwood, Camp Bowie in Brownwood for about 4 or 5 months.
Right.
To get ready to go overseas.
Now I want you to tell the viewers about your trip overseas. You tended to get seasick. And there's a rather funny story about when you got seasick going over and getting stranded on the boat. Tell us that story.
I got seasick before I ever left New York Harbor. I just couldn't stand
just thinking about it.
Thinking about it. Well, being down in the hull of a ship and the thing going this way and that way,
right?
It just threw me for a loop. I didn't eat.
Right. For
2 solid weeks. My buddies would bring me fruit.
And you were on a zigzag course too, right?
And we were zigzagging, and but they sent me up to the infirmary when we were about halfway across, and they gave me a shot.
Uh-huh.
And now they said, we're going to take you out on deck.
Uh-huh.
And where you can, it was a nice day, it was sunshine, where you could relate the movement of the ship to the waves of the ocean. I said, well, fine. And they gave me a box of these saltine crackers to eat.
Right, to calm your stomach.
Yeah. So I ate those crackers. I sat out there, but what they did was, now there's not supposed to be any troops out on deck, so we're going to have to tie it to this rigging. So they took a big belt and put it around me and tied it to this rigging. And I couldn't reach the buckle. I couldn't get loose.
You were out on the deck?
Out on the deck. And I sat there all afternoon and I ate those crackers. And long about the time the sun was going down, almost down, I noticed these destroyers would come up real close and people would get out there and they're looking at me. And what are they looking at me for? Well, I wasn't supposed to be out there. So pretty soon an officer come by and he said, I could see that they had communication between these ships and the convoy and the ship I was on. And he come up to me and he says, "Soldier, what are you doing out here?" I says, "Well, they brought me out here from the infirmary because I was seasick for a long time and wanted to get my stomach straightened down." But I said, the man that brought me out here said he would come back and get me. He didn't come back. He went off duty. He forgot about me. But I was strapped to this rigging. I couldn't get loose. I just sat out there. He shook his head. God, I've never seen anything like this.
I'll bet he hadn't. You told me another story about sort of sneaking in to take a hot shower. You were a non-com, but they told you how to get to the officers' quarters to take a shower, right?
Yeah, our outfit, our executive officer, he said, when you want to shower, he said, just put your raincoat on with no insignia on it, no rank.
Yeah.
He said, go up the steps. On the left is the cold water showers for the enlisted people. On the right is hot water showers for the officers. He said, go in there as an officer and take a shower. He said, just wear a raincoat. They won't know the difference. And they didn't. That's where I went to get my showers.
You arrived in Europe in the winter of 1945. This was after the Battle of the Bulge, when the war was winding down.
Right.
You landed in France, went across Belgium, France, Belgium, and into Germany. Talk about what you remember about your service there, about your months there. There was not a lot of combat, but you did cross the Rhine River. Talk about what you recall about the service there.
Yeah, we moved. We had to get off. When we got off the troop ship, we went to a holding area because they had to unload our equipment. that took a week or 10 days.
Right.
When we got our equipment, then we started moving up through across France and Belgium into Germany. We crossed the Rhine River. I crossed the Rhine River on a little old footbridge.
Right.
And moved on up into Germany, into a little town that was built around a square, but maybe it was 15, 20,000 people, but they were the nicest people. We moved them out of their homes to get the houses that we need to sleep in.
Right.
But they didn't resent us. We'd come back, they had gardens out behind their home because they didn't have much food. But I was a section leader. I had 18 men. And the first thing that some of my men wanted to do was went out into their strawberry fields and started eating their strawberries. Well, I got them out of there, and I laid the law down that I didn't want to see an American out there in those gardens.
Yes, sir.
I said, that's all those German women have is what's in those gardens.
Yes, sir.
They need that food.
Right.
And
that was a wonderful relationship
yeah,
you had. They were considered the enemy, but
right,
they were nice people because
they were real nice people. What they wanted was, one of the things they really wanted was soap.
Right.
You couldn't buy a bar of soap in Europe after the war. But the Army had these big bars of lye soap, and I'd go to the supply sergeant and get 4 or 5 at a time, and those German women would come over to the house where I was living, their house really, and you want your clothes washed? I said, yeah, we need some soap. Well, I'd give them a whole big bar of soap. They wouldn't use much of it. They'd take the rest home because you couldn't beg, borrow, or steal a bar of soap in Europe after the war.
You know what's kind of ironic is that after you got out, you spent 45 years selling soap, didn't you?
Yeah.
For Purex, right?
Yeah, right.
We'll talk about that in a little bit also. What do you remember about where you were on VE Day? That was May the 8th. May the 7th, the Germans surrendered. VE Day was May the 8th. What do you remember about where you were and sort of how you got the word and the celebration of that?
Yeah, we'd moved up across the Rhine and set up camp in this little town. It was a nice town. It was a friendly town. But you always have people in your unit that goes overboard on things. These 2 guys had found a wine cellar, and it had a 2.5-ton truck, and they loaded that 2.5-ton truck down with all the wine they could find, and they had just gobs of it. So when they announced the end of the war, they brought this truck into our compound and parked it and said, boys, come and get it. And the GIs just went, wow, I drank a little bit too much myself, but they went out there and get 3, 4 bottles of wine when they only shouldn't need 1, you know, and a lot of them got sick and they had a mess on their hands. But finally, the Inspector General come by a couple of days afterwards, and he ate the butt out of our commanding officer for letting the things get out of hand. You know,
I'll bet he did.
Yeah.
We've got some pictures here that I want to go to and look at. Just a few pictures here that you supplied us. This is a picture of a young Army soldier, Richardson. You believe that was taken after your service, right? You were young.
I think that was taken after I come back from overseas.
From overseas, yeah. Well, you've got your tech sergeant stripes on there. Now we're gonna go way back when you were young, 16, 17 years old, and this is what you were talking about in Minnesota and the rifle company in Minnesota, right?
That's the National Guard.
National Guard Rifle Company, right?
Yeah, it's a rifle company.
Right. I want to mention you are top row, second from the right, as we're looking at the picture. That's you. Yeah.
Yeah, I not bragging, but I was a good shot with a rifle.
That's okay.
I made the state rifle team.
Yes, sir.
And we went to every year we went, the state would send a rifle team to Camp Perry, Ohio, to the national rifle matches.
Right.
They used to have national rifle matches there.
Right.
Before the war.
Yes, sir.
So I made a trip. That's the Minnesota team right there.
Yes, sir. That's a great picture. That's hanging on your wall in your bedroom, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
This is a photograph that I found of a 40 millimeter, very similar to the one that was your specialty, just so people can get an idea of what the 40 millimeter looked like. And
yeah, it was a good gun.
Yep.
It was a real good gun. It was automatic.
Right.
That man had the clip of shells.
Yes, sir.
You could feed it with a clip.
Right.
And the only thing you just had to be careful of was not to push them down in there too fast and they'd jam up, you know.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. But you were an expert with that weapon.
Yeah.
That played havoc on low-flying aircraft.
I spent a lot of time with that weapon. I was an instructor on it for almost 2 years.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. There's a photograph that hangs on your wall of a shadow box of your memorabilia from the war, a picture in the middle, your tech sergeant stripes, some of your participation medals from the war. I see your dog tags there in the bottom right. And I guess those are your unit insignias up there at the top, I guess, right? And
yeah, that was a
right.
Anti-aircraft artillery. That was the 2nd Army insignia in the center on top.
And the little plaque under your picture talks about being the 303rd Ordinance Company.
Yeah.
So I know that that's very special to you. I know one of your sons made that up for you. And then finally, a picture of you and your wife, Betty, taken several years ago. You lost your wife, Betty, several years ago, I know. And but you and Betty actually got married before you went overseas. Isn't that right?
Oh yeah, yeah. We married when I was in the Army.
Right.
We were married in, let's see, in 12th of April, 42.
Okay. Remembering the 12th of April is more important than the year to wives, so that's good.
yeah, that's
1942. Right, yeah. That's a wonderful picture. Yeah. And I know that Betty went with you down to Texas when you were at Fort Wallace, and you eventually came back to Texas. Before we leave your service, though, you were offered a commission to become a 2nd lieutenant, but you turned it down, and I want you to tell them why. Yeah,
well, this colonel, he was a good guy. He come to me one time, and he says, Sergeant, he says, every GI in the Army wanted to go to OCS to become an officer.
Yes.
That was their thing. They just wanted to become an officer.
Right.
So this colonel pinned me down one day, and he says, why didn't you go to OCS? I said, why should I go to OCS? He said, don't you want to be an officer? I said, well, why should I want to be an officer? I said, what does a 2nd lieutenant make? He says, $125 a month. Well, as a tech sergeant, I made $121 a month. An officer had to buy his uniform. He had to pay, if the ration allowance was 50 cents a day, he had to pay 50 cents a day for his food.
Right.
He had to buy his uniforms. I said, I get my food for free, I get my uniforms for free, and I get, my pay is $2 or $3 less than an officer. Why should I want to be an officer?
Makes sense to me.
He says, well, you got a good point there. But he said, a lot of people just want to be an officer. Just for the glory of it. I said, well, I'm not looking for any glory.
Right.
I said, I'm not going to make a career out of the Army. When the war is over, I'm going to get out. And that's it.
Yeah. Now, a very important point. When the war was over in Europe, you got on a boat. You thought you were going home, but you didn't. You were headed to the Philippines. Right. And it wasn't until you all got to Panama that you got the word. Talk about that.
Yeah, they pulled us out of Germany on the 4th of July and down to Marseille, France, into a staging area. We had to turn in our equipment. And so I told the men in my section, I said, well, we got to turn in our equipment. We're going into a staging area. That means we're going to get on a ship. If we're going to get on a ship, I think we're going home. So we were there about 2 weeks. They finally loaded us onto gondola cars on a train and took us down to the dock and put us on this boat. And the first thing I did was ask one of the members of the crew on the boat, where are we going? They just look at you and shake their head. I knew what was up, you know. They weren't allowed to say where they were going.
Right.
So we got, we were at sea, got out of the, what's the name of that big sea?
You were at sea, yes?
No, not the Red Sea, but
right.
I can't think anyway.
Okay. You're asking me geography questions, and I'm going to be back.
Between Africa and
right.
the U.S.
Okay, right.
So I just sat back and moved my bedroll and everything out on deck, and I slept on deck, and we were going across the South Atlantic. It was pretty warm. But we were pulled up outside of Panama Canal.
Right.
And I was sleeping out on deck, and we had a 5-inch AA gun up there. And all of a sudden, these guys started firing that 5-inch AA gun. Now, I wasn't 40, 50 feet away. It almost rolled me out of my bedroll. I went over there and I said, what in the devil are you guys shooting at? There's no Jap planes around here. We're not shooting at Jap planes. Had you heard? He said, Japan has surrendered. The war is over with.
And that was a celebration.
And that was a celebration. About 15, 20 minutes later, the captain got on the
right.
intercom and announced it. He said, now hear this, now hear this. Japan has surrendered. The war is over, and I've just received orders to weigh anchor and proceed to the port of New York for debarkation.
Mr. Richardson, we're just about out of time. I wanted to talk about other things, but so you did go back to New York. You were discharged in November of 1945. You worked for the Purex company for some 45 years. You and Betty had 3 children. Your son Larry, your oldest, you all lost to cancer a few years ago. Kirk
right.
works here at Texas A&M as a firefighter instructor, and Andy lives in Houston. Those are your 3 sons,
right.
and you have grandchildren. And I want to thank you for your service, but we're out of time. I wish we could talk more, but thank you very much for your service.
Well, thank you for having me.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Richard Richardson trained to shoot down enemy planes, but fortunately never had to. Like so many who entered the service in 1941, his was nonetheless a proud Army career of readiness. We salute him for his military service and his civilian work, and at age 95, regularly breaking 90 on the golf course. Now that's impressive. I'm Tom Turbeville. Join us next time on Veterans of the Valley.